So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to today's webinar. I'm John James and I'm your host for today's event.
Okay, thank you, John. Well, welcome everyone again. It's great to have this series of webinars available for the Primary Innovation Program, and I'd just like to stop and say thank you to John for your help in getting these webinars up and running. You're so organised and you're really calm and you make them just flow, and so that's awesome. Thank you, John, for that. And also just to remind everybody, we send around an invitation to the webinars for anyone who's initially in the Primary Innovation Program, but you can forward those to anyone who you think might be interested in what's happening in the Primary Innovation Program so that they can register their interest for the webinar and come along and listen in. So please do that, and I'll keep reminding people when I send out invitations as well. So we've got Aniek as our first speaker today, and Aniek Wilkins is one of the 2 PhD students working on aspects of the Primary Innovation Program, and she's based at Massey University up in Palmy for the duration of her PhD. She comes from the Netherlands and studied at Wageningen University, and she started in July 2004 with her PhD, and she's supervised by Janet Reed and David Gray and Laurens Clerks from Wageningen. And the scholarship of her PhD is from One Farm, the Centre of Farm Business Management, and Aniek gets additional funding from our Primary Innovation Program. So I'm going to let her take it over from there. Thanks, Aniek.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Denise. Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. In this presentation, I would like to tell you about my PhD research. So first, I would like to introduce myself, but actually Denise did that already very well. So I did my bachelor and my master in applied communication science in Wageningen in the Netherlands, and my master thesis was about the social influence on antibiotic usage by dairy farmers. Well, we published an article on that, which you can see here. And then when I was graduating, I saw the PhD opportunity at Massey University, which was advertised by Laurens, one of my teachers at my bachelor and my master. And then a while later, I was in New Zealand, for the ones who didn't see me at the picture of myself. And so now I'm doing my PhD at Massey since July 2014. And also already my first publication of my PhD in a local newspaper. So that was a bit about myself. And then about the content of the research. So dairy is really important in New Zealand. As you can see in the image here, there are some economic reasons. So for example, there is 1.7 billion kilograms of milk solids produced each year, and also a lot of jobs are in the dairy sector. 37,000 employees in this image from Dairy NZ. It was in 2014, if I'm correct. Well, also the sector has been very innovative in the past, and now there are actors in the sector arguing for a need for innovation in farm business management skills. So, for example, Dairy NZ argues that the industry would be significantly more profitable if farmers had better farm business management skills. And they also have a project which is increasing farm performance through farm business management training, and it aims to increase the financial and staff management skills of dairy farmers. So the aim of my research is to gain insights that will assist the sector to support innovation in farm business management, and I believe to meaningfully study and understand innovation that you need a systems view. And the theoretical standpoint that I take towards innovation is that innovation is the result of a complex process of interaction and learning among a wide range of actors. So therefore, I look at innovation in farm business management from a systems perspective. And I already did some exploratory interviews with key informants, which was really interesting, and I asked them about their definition of farm business management and what is then the difference between farm business management and financial management. And actually most striking was that different people define farm business management differently. And some had a really clear idea about what it was, and also about farm business management and the difference between farm business management and financial management, but others were not that clear about it. And I also found that there were multiple actors in the system. So key informants mentioned farmers, accountants, consultants, bank managers, training organizations, education institutions, the industry good organization Dairy and Z, people who deliver farm inputs, and software developers. And I also asked key informants about what issues are concerning farm business management, and then also opinions were different. And some thought that there weren't really issues. But one informant pointed, for example, to the need for farmers to back up their financial decisions with black and white numbers. And someone else thought that there is a need for improving the business acumen of dairy farmers. Okay, then something about the literature. So at this moment, I'm actually exploring and reviewing the literature that could potentially be relevant to look at innovation in farm business management. And well, I will give you a bit of an overview. I won't give you the whole overview, but a feel for the literature. So of course, I dove into the farm business management literature. And so, as I already said, that key informants have different definitions of what farm business management is, and also the way the term is used in academia differs among scholars. So some see farm business management as an umbrella over everything that is done on the farm, whereas other authors that use the term mostly focus on financial aspects. And studies that are done in this space actually mostly look at individual characteristics of the farmer. So they only look at the farmer, which could, for example, be this pink person in the foreground. And whereas actually the theoretical standpoint I take towards innovation is that it's a system, and innovation happens in interaction, so that more actors and only the farmer are important. But most of the literature in farm business management only looks at the farmer and individual characteristics of the farmer. Yes, that. So I use agricultural innovation systems theory, or I have looked at that. And that views innovation as a result of a complex process of interaction and learning among a wide range of actors. And by using this theory, it actually enables me to gain an understanding about, for example, the different actors and the interactions and institutions in the system. And actually, innovation systems theory enables me also to get a broad overview of the system and what is happening. But to get more in-depth idea, I think it would be really relevant. Could be really relevant to also look at theories about the nature of interactions. So, for example, as I already said, that definitions about farm business management already were different among different key informants. So, theories about worldviews could be relevant. So, what is the influence of different worldviews? But also theories about agenda setting. So how is it actually decided that farm business management skills should be improved? Yeah, so that's a bit about the literature. And so I'm now writing my literature review, and my next step will be developing my methodology further. So I'm now, I already know that I will do a qualitative research, but I have to develop that further. And when I develop my methodology, I will do my confirmation seminar. And then after that, in August, I will go to the Netherlands. And then when I come back, I will start my data collection. So that was a bit about my research. And if there are questions or if you have feedback, it would be really nice. Thank you.
And as it happens, Aniek, yes, we do have some. So for those who haven't yet had the opportunity, you can type in your questions now or comments for Aniek. So first one here is there anything that stands out as being different or the same in terms of farm business management between New Zealand and the Netherlands? So yeah, just after your personal comments about that.
Farm business management in New Zealand and the Netherlands. Well, farm business management, that term is actually, I heard it the first time when I came here, I have to admit. So I can say something maybe about the differences in the farm system, but not really maybe specifically about farm business management. So for example, so I don't know.
Well, can I ask you?
About that?
Well, I'm curious to know. Do you find that the people in the Netherlands are more business orientated than the ones in New Zealand, perhaps, or any differences in their perceptions like that?
Yeah, I think the big difference between New Zealand and the Netherlands is that in the Netherlands there was, so in Europe actually there have been more, the agriculture has been more subsidized, and so that's why the system is different. But now the subsidies decrease in Europe. So the European Union, for example, how do you say that, wants farmers to be more entrepreneurial. So they actually talk more in terms of improving entrepreneurship or increasing entrepreneurship, whereas in New Zealand it is more talked about indeed farm business management skills. So maybe more financial efficiency, whereas in the Netherlands or Europe it's more entrepreneurship, and then they talk more about seeking for new market opportunities, or like multifunctional agriculture, and yeah, more in that sense. So there are these developments as well, but they are slightly different and they have a different context. They happen in a different context.
Okay, well that's good. Thanks, Aniek. There's another couple of questions here. So now one from Jeff. Can you give us a hint of the methodology you're thinking of at this early stage?
A hint of a methodology. Good question. So yeah, I think I'm going to do semi-structured interviews with people, and well, so yeah, I don't know exactly what geographical location I will look at. Maybe I have to be practical on that, but that's the hint I can give. Yeah, it's going to be qualitative research, and I'm going to do interviews and document analysis. Yeah, so it's a very broad hint, not very yeah, not very specific yet.
No, I think you're doing well to know even that at this stage. So well done. Another question here, so one from Jessica. She's asking, would you say that dairy farmers are at the front of farm business management compared to, say, cropping farmers? And she's curious to know, why did you choose dairy farmers?
That's a good question. Well, I chose dairy farmers because, well, that was actually already chosen for me when I came here. So it was, what was already decided was that I had to look, or I was looking at dairy farmers and innovation. So that were my, and I don't know, I'm really interested in the dairy sector, so that was a good, well, that was nice. And that's a good question, actually. I didn't look at differences between cropping farmers and dairy farmers. What I heard is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, what I heard is that dairy farmers, that cropping farmers are really, no, I don't know, that they are very innovative in their farm business management, but well, I didn't go in that myself, so I cannot really, but it's maybe a good idea, or it's a good point. I could, would be interesting to also look at that, or at least to get a, so sorry, no, I cannot comment on that.
That's okay. Well, you may be pleased to hear that's all the questions at the moment, although I guess people might ask some questions later on. So how about at this stage, we'll take the pressure off you, Aniek, and we'll go over to Sam, who's just loading up his presentation, which I can see coming up on my screen. And yes, I can see it in full screen. So Denise, over to you to introduce Sam.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thanks Aniek. I'll introduce Sam Beechner, who's the second of the 2 PhD students working on aspects of the Primary Innovation Program, and he is based at the moment at Ruakura until later this year. So Sam is from the UK. He's worked with a private animal health company called Hirsch, which I'm not sure, or Intervet, which I'm not sure I'm getting that pronunciation right. Sorry, Sam. And before he joined ADES, which is one of the UK's leading environmental consultancies, in 2003. And he did a wide variety of work for that, and most recently liaising with DEFRA, which is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, with a whole lot of account management and project bidding activities. So now he's undertaking his PhD project, which is based at the University of Edinburgh, but it's co-funded by AgResearch and the Scottish Rural SRUC, which was the old Scottish Agricultural College in Scotland, with additional input from Wageningen University. So I'll hand over to Sam. Thanks.
Thanks, Denise, and thank you, Aniek, as well. I really enjoyed your presentation. So, as Denise said, my name's Sam Beechner, and I'm interested in how co-innovation impacts on scaling. And I've put together a short presentation to provide you with an overview of my project. I did agree with John beforehand. I'd welcome interruptions, questions and comments as we go through, so please feel free to send through any queries or comments as we go along, and John will intervene and pass them on. So would welcome any feedback as we go through. So as Denise mentioned, my background is in the the social sciences, and the focus of my work is very much around investigating behaviours and attitudes, and very much as Aniek described, it's not just restricted to farmers and growers, but I'm interested in a much wider group of stakeholders and actors in the innovation system. So that's really the context of the project. I'm a full-time student. I had a slight head start over Aniek. I started in November 2013, and the university want me finished by April 2017, so that's the timescale that I'm working on. And I feel really privileged to have had the chance to come to New Zealand for 12 months. So I'm halfway through already. I came across here in November of last year, and I'm heading back to the UK at the end of October of this year. And I can't really emphasise strongly enough how useful the opportunity has been, and the opportunities it's provided in terms of gaining a better understanding of the project and seeing it all operating at grassroots. It's been a tremendous help. So the project's co-funded by SRUC in Scotland. Denise, you're not the only one that doesn't quite understand what those abbreviations stand for. None of us are quite clear, I don't think. But it's SRUC and AgResearch, the co-funders. So it's very much collaborative in the way that it's structured. And we have additional input as well from the Knowledge, Technology and Innovation group at Wageningen, and also the Science, Technology and Innovation Studies group at the University of Edinburgh. And I'll say a little bit more about some of those groups as we go through, but just to comment to those of you that don't know SRUC, it's not really that dissimilar to AgResearch in the way it's structured. It does have a program of higher education from vocational right through to PhD level. It also has a number of demonstration experimental farms across Scotland. It has some core funding from the Scottish Government. The rest of its financing is delivered through contestable bidding. And it's also interesting that it has a farm consultancy arm, so it really does cover a wide span of activities. And also just to touch on some of the activities at the Science, Technology and Innovation Studies group at Edinburgh. That's headed up by Professor Robin Williams, and it's an interesting connection there for us. They're interested in transitions and critiquing different developments, and it gives us a very nice link really in terms of some of the theories that we're going to come on to in a moment or two in the presentation. Denise mentioned my own practical experience. She was too kind to say that I'm a mature student, so I do bring with me some background experience, about 10 years in the UK animal health sector with Herxel, then Intervet, and 10 years with the Agricultural Development and Advisory Service. That's a leading provider of rural and environmental advice in England, and to, as Denise explained, to DEFRA. So we'll move on to the next slide, which gives you something more of an introduction to the project itself. And I'm sure we'd all agree there's sort of lots of challenges that facing farmers and growers and all the sort of associated stakeholders. Some of them are global in terms of their context. I'm thinking there in terms of the challenge of feeding the world's growing population. Some of them are much more local, for example, how to respond to falling milk prices or deteriorating water quality at a farm level. Some of them are highly complex, multidimensional. They have no definitive solutions, and in fact the risk of giving rise to additional problems that might not have been foreseen emerging from the solutions that are emerging. And those are sometimes described as wicked problems. And if we accept that argument, then it follows really that sort of new ways of operating have to be explored to address those so-called wicked problems. And that's really what we're sort of getting to the crux of things when it comes to co-innovation there. So we're saying new ways of operating have to be explored. And the primary innovation project that's piloting co-innovation approaches here in New Zealand provides such an exciting focus for this particular study because it's actually implementing this co-innovation approach on the ground. And as a person that's interested in studying the impacts of co-innovation, it provides golden opportunity to try and explore a little bit more about how co-innovation impacts on scaling and to what extent those findings could be more widely generalized between sectors and also potentially between countries. So I thought it was helpful, Aniek, you already mentioned that sort of different definitions used by different groups, and I think I've seen that already in the short time I've been in New Zealand. Co-innovation seems to mean a number of different things to various different people. The definition for my purposes at the outset certainly was it's all about cooperation between stakeholders. I thought initially it was all about working towards a mutual benefit. I'm not so sure that's the case anymore. I think it's sort of, I'd really welcome people's thoughts on that. Some of the cases that you see, you wonder whether stakeholders are involved to try and prevent least worst outcome being the result of the work rather than the promise of any actual mutual benefit. So I think there's an interesting exploration or scope for exploration around that. But over and above that, it requires an open and inquiring approach, and it's all very much about a commitment to learning and reflexivity amongst participants. So that's co-innovation. I'm probably telling people what you already know in context of that, but scaling is slightly more problematic. It's not a term that's in very wide use, certainly in the UK context, and I don't think New Zealand's any different in that point of view. Scaling up and scaling out are the way that it tends to be described, and the literature suggests those tend to be interconnected. One rarely happens without the other. And scaling up really is about the hierarchical connections, sort of vertical connections if you like, and scaling out is more geographical or horizontal spread over time. And what we're trying to get at when we talk about scaling is a sort of a group or a community or a regional shift rather than an individual diffusion of innovations, which you might be familiar through the work of Rogers and others. So hold on to those definitions. I thought it might be helpful to give you a sort of a practical example of what they mean in the field. And after I put my slides together, I actually had a much better example, or a very useful example I felt on the radio. They were talking about the implementation of pre-surgical checklists in hospital. So it's not the agricultural field, but I think it's useful nonetheless. And this area of work, there was nothing novel about checklists themselves, and that's why it's so helpful, because we can see that they're not confusing inventions and innovations, but the way the checklists are used is where the innovation comes in. So they're encouraging surgical teams to use these checklists ahead of surgery, and where they've got these techniques in place, they've got dramatic drops in mortality. And it helps us also in terms of conceptualizing scaling up, because they're working with health boards, health authorities and governments to try and get endorsement for the checklist approach, and scaling out, working at a hospital level and with theatres within hospitals, trying to get uptake of this checklist approach amongst surgeons. And I think if we think farmers and growers can be difficult, then by the sounds of it, surgeons can be much more difficult altogether. The example that I've got here, bringing it back to the agricultural sector, it's all about family farms in the south of Uruguay. They were faced with a combination of falling returns and increasing soil degradation. And so the knee-jerk reaction was really to try and increase productivity, to try and boost returns, and that was a vicious circle really leading to worsening soil conditions. So what happened here in a small pilot project, they adopted a co-innovation approach and involved a wide range of stakeholders. And in fact, they found that the sustainability of the farms could be improved. And the key learnings from that really were where farmers lacked access to necessary resources, as you can see on the slide there. Then support from union leaders and development officers at a regional level was required, and that gives us the idea of scaling up to allow the innovations to take root. And scaling out, that's when we turn to extension officers and technical advisors, and their role was really about shifting the emphasis away from the tactical day-to-day operational matters, much more to a sort of longer-term planning horizon and evaluation of ongoing activities. So the reference there, just at the foot of the slide if you're interested, that's a paper by Dogliotti et al, and it's something that was circulated by Niels as part of Stream 1 activity. So if you get the chance to have a look at that, then it's worth a quick read. So moving on, I wanted to touch on the theoretical perspectives behind the project. There are two here to outline in brief. So the first of them is the multi-level perspective. You'll sometimes see that abbreviated as the MLP. And this is work that's really emerged from this sort of Science, Technology, Innovation Studies group, which I referred to earlier in the context of the group at Edinburgh. And Frank Giels has done a lot of work in this area, and he's very much sort of presenting this in terms of helping to understand how scaling happens, how transitions take place. And just to outline this to you, so we've got the sort of multi-level perspective as a concept or a theory that can help us to understand some of the complex transitions around sustainability. There are three core components to the multi-level perspective, and you can see those on the diagram there. So at the top, you'll notice to the left, landscape conditions, and that's really referring to the sort of the macro conditions, if you like, the sort of political landscape, climatological, those sort of very much macro conditions. Coming down a level, we come to the regime conditions. So this is the meso level, I guess, and this is all about sort of dominant systems. You can see the sort of language alongside there. It talks about markets and user preferences, and we've got industry groups, policies, science, culture, technology, interactions. And if we drop down to the third level, this is the sort of the micro level, if you like, and these are the niche conditions. And the argument is that for new innovations to survive in what can be very brutal and competitive regime conditions, they benefit from protective niche conditions or niche environments to allow them to become established and to develop and to test themselves out in the sort of in the marketplace. We're talking about protection. It might be in the form of sort of pilot funding or pilot trials, or it might be in the form of some sort of regulatory benefits that allow them to operate with certain advantages while they become established or find their feet in the market. So that just gives you a feel there for the different levels within the multi-level perspective, so those being the niche, the regime, and the landscape. The interactions between niche and regime, tongue-tied here, are clearly critical, but there is a concern that those interactions aren't necessarily fully understood or as well understood as they might be. So if we move on to the next slide, which is slide 6, and that'll be coming up on your screens in just a moment. And here I want to introduce you to a concept of anchoring. This is proposed by Uli Elson and colleagues at Wageningen. And they've very deliberately chosen the word anchoring to describe this particular approach. And they wanted to capture the concept that if forces move in one direction, then in fact the anchor will dig deeper. If forces flow in the opposite direction, then the anchor is subject to becoming dislodged or uprooted effectively. And in the work that they've done, they've suggested that there are three components to this concept of anchoring, and they talk in terms of network anchoring, which is to do with the people involved, gaining confidence in the innovation itself, getting behind it, working alongside others to achieve that anchoring. Technological anchoring refers to the sort of the technology itself becoming tried and tested and trusted and established in the marketplace, so becoming proven through use. And then the third of the three concepts is institutional anchoring, and that really refers to the sort of the normative and economic functions around the innovation and sort of the rules and regulations that work alongside it. And what they argued was that for sort of innovations to take root or to become anchored, then all three of those components needed to be in place. they needed to see evidence of network, technological, and institutional anchoring before innovations then moved from the niche to a regime and were able to compete at the regime level. So the arrows on the diagram here are just trying to reflect the sort of the interactions between landscape and regime, niche and landscape, niche and regime, the whole complexity of interactions between those different levels. It's messy, it's interactive. They talked in terms of interactions between the niche and the regime in terms of the hybrid forum, and that was a sort of a special area where discussions and dialogue can take place between key stakeholders, some of whom have ability to move from niche to regime and back and forth fairly readily. So those, in a nutshell, are the two theories that we're drawing on to inform the approach to the project. So that brings us on really just to a quick summary of the aims and objectives of the work. So the aim is very much about exploring scaling from niche to regime of co-innovation activities in the agri-food sector, and that's going to be achieved through applying the multi-level perspective to a study of the New Zealand sector in particular, and using the concept of anchoring that we've just talked about to explore in particular the interactions between niche and regime at project level. So that's the primary objectives. As secondary objectives, we're also interested at the program level in interactions between niche and regime. That's very much around the activities of Stream 3, if you think about the work they're doing around enabling co-innovation, and also bearing in mind the international funding structure of the project, we're interested in investigating the extent to which findings around scaling of co-innovation apply more widely. That's particularly in the Scottish context. So I'll just show you quickly on the next slide, which is slide 8, which will be coming up in just a moment, the research questions themselves that we're working towards. Firstly, what's understood as co-innovation? We've already touched on the different definitions and the different meanings to different groups. I think there's sort of interesting in the early interviews that I've undertaken that people have different understandings of co-innovation. So it's important to gain some feel for that sort of breadth of understanding and to try and ground that out a little bit. And the focus really is sort of around the interactions between niche and regime, particularly in the context of technological network and institutional anchoring with respect to the co-innovation projects, and then how those interactions then influence scaling from niche to regime. And then fourthly, to what extent those findings with respect to the work in New Zealand are more widely generalizable at the program level and then beyond New Zealand. So moving on to slide 9, what I'm trying to do here is just to give you an overview of the proposed approach. So slightly ahead of Aniek here in terms of the planning process. So it's going to be a mixed methods approach, going to be sequential. The emphasis is very much on the qualitative stage, which is the focus of the work here in New Zealand. So it's a field study, a case study of co-innovation in practice here in New Zealand in the agri-food sector. That's a qualitative approach. And we're going to be using the findings from that work to inform the design of a very small scale survey, which will be around about 100 participants or 100 interviews with key participants back in the Scottish sector. That will take place probably spring next year to try and provide some quantification of the sort of the wider generalizability of the findings. That all comes together then in the interpretation stage, the primary objectives there being addressed with the qualitative work and the secondary objectives with the quantitative approach. And that all pulls together then into the final PhD report for Edinburgh as the awarding authority. So what that means on the ground here in New Zealand is a focus very much around 4 case studies, 3 of them within the primary innovation project itself. So the heifer rearing work, those of you that are familiar with it will be aware that that's all about encouraging a more joined up approach between farmers and their advisors. I've been working closely with Bruce and with Paula and with Rob and others around that project to try and understand a little bit more from the different perspectives what's involved there, and trying to work alongside Bruce so that we don't sort of duplicate work that's going on as part of the ongoing monitoring and evaluation associated with that project. And it's great. Akiko and myself had the opportunity to go out onto farm with a couple of interviews just recently, and speaking with those farmers, it was really encouraging to hear from their point of view that they already felt they were realising benefits from the project, and it was opening up new opportunities for them which they didn't feel would necessarily have been presented if they'd been trying to continue business as usual. So some very encouraging early findings from that. Secondly, the water use efficiency in the Waimakariri irrigation scheme. So those of you that are familiar with that will be aware it's about enabling better matching of soil moisture with crop needs. I think it's a really exciting project, lots of really interesting work and activity going on in that area. I was very grateful to be hosted by NIWA for a couple of weeks at the end of March, to give me the opportunity to speak with farmers and stakeholders from a wide range of policy and zone committee perspectives, and had tremendous support from Denise and MS from NIWA in terms of having access to context around that particular project. That one's really exciting in terms of sort of where it goes next. So it's very much about transitions in the making and making those sort of scaling from the pilot stage and effecting changes to take it up to the next level. That's work in progress, and working alongside MS and Denise and others to follow that one through. The third one on the list there is all around the Land and Environment Planning Toolkit, and that's all about helping beef and sheep farmers to comply with some legislative requirements and around the area of sort of environmental protection and demonstrating good management practice. And had good support there from colleagues down at Palmerston North. And it's interesting in terms of the sort of the lead in to that particular project and the history behind it all, and then the sort of combination of factors that actually sort of came together to allow that project to move on then to the next scale. So it's really been endorsed by Beef and Lamb New Zealand, and there's a lot of work going on in the form of farm workshops. I was lucky enough to go to one near here just recently, seeing that put into practice at ground level. So it's interesting trying to use that to understand what those interactions have been between different parties to allow that to make the transition from niche to potentially break through to the regime level. We thought it was maybe as a safeguard to have one project outside the Primary Innovation Project. So the one that we've got there is facial eczema. Some of you will be aware of that. It's a sort of, as far as I understand it, there was a fairly or a very severe outbreak here in New Zealand back in the 1920s and 1930s, and that really underpinned the formation of ag research here at Ruakura, or certainly the activities here at Ruakura. And it's really been an ongoing problem for the agricultural industry since then. The different sectors have responded in different ways, and there's been genetic advances in the sheep sector, which have allowed them to respond in one particular direction. The dairy sector and the beef sector have responded slightly differently, and there's now work trying to pull those sectors together and see if there are opportunities for cross-sectoral learnings. So there's work going on here on a fairly small scale, involving vets and farmers and growers and a host of other people, scientific input from people here at Ag Research, and that provides us with a useful case study in terms of co-innovation, self-starting, if you like, outside the formal Primary Innovation Project itself. So that gives you a flavour for the case studies. 4 of those, also working alongside Kelly, James and Tracy around Stream 3 at the programme level to try and understand some of those interactions at the wider programme level. And as I say, there'll be a small scale quantitative survey to follow when I get back to Scotland at the end of the year. So hopefully that's given you a flavour for the sort of work that I'm conducting. Quick gallop through the project itself. I'd like to acknowledge the tremendous support I've had from my supervisors. I've got 5 supervisors across 4 institutes. There's Neil here at Ag Research and Bruce at Edinburgh, Andrew Barnes and Chris Lampranopoulou at SRUC, and Lawrence, of course, at Wageningen. And also to take the opportunity to say a wider thank you to the Primary Innovation Project team. They've made me feel very welcome, and all the support they've given me with the project so far has been much appreciated. So on that point, just like to say thank you. That completes my presentation, and I'd welcome any comments, feedback, or observations that you might have.
Great, thanks Sam. And we do have some questions, comments. I am conscious of time. We did say that these webinars generally go for 40 minutes, so I'll try to keep this brief. So first of all, Denise, liked your comment about the least worst outcome, and I made a note of that one too. I like that saying. And she thinks it's a good start for getting people into the same room to talk, so it can lead over time to co-innovation, and that you've got to start somewhere. And Jeff's made a comment saying he's enjoyed the theory presented here today, and it's a really nice base to build on, so well done. He liked anchoring. He thought that was a great metaphor, and he looks forward to seeing the rest of the presentation later on. So he thanks both Aniek and you, Sam, for your presentations today.
Thank you.
That's good. So Denise has a question here. So it's about the co-innovation work in the UK. So on slide 9, there's a comment there about how under your quantitative survey and its interviews with the key actors in the Scottish agri-food sector. So can you tell us which part of the agri-food sector is that?
What we envisage at this stage is there's a lot of work going on around electronic identification of sheep, for example. It's highly contentious. Regulatory drivers sort of putting pressure on producers and then stakeholders within the group. And SRUC are involved in facilitating a number of workshops around that particular activity. And we think there might be scope there to build on that and to try and explore to what extent some of the findings to emerge from work around the co-innovation activities here in New Zealand resonate with counterparts, if you like, in Scotland, to see if they can be transferred from one context to another.
Very good. And can you just pop back to your anchoring slide, please? Aniek has a question there. If you can just clarify the institutional anchoring, and maybe is there an example you could give?
Yeah, so institutional, it's the most problematic, I find, of the three prongs of the anchoring approach. But it's very much to do with the sort of the prevailing rules and regulations. And in the context of the work that was done by Bully Elson and her colleagues, there were some sort of regulatory sort of allowances made by the sort of the Dutch government that gave this particular technology an opportunity to get a foothold. So it gave that initial protection that applied to that particular innovation and allowed it to sort of become established and gave it a sort of a preferred status, if you like, that sort of gave it that degree of protection. So that's really what it's driving to. But it can, of course, work in the opposite direction. So if you've got rules or regulations which mitigate against a certain approach, then, of course, they can be counterproductive. And that's where you get into this whole area of taking the dialogue up the chain and engaging with the policymakers and decision makers to try and influence them at that level to give you more benign conditions to bring your innovation to fruition.
Good. Okay, thanks, Sam. So that's all the questions and comments. So Denise, I'll pass back to you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming along, and thank you again to John for organising it. Thanks, Aniek and Sam. It's really cool to get an overview of what you're doing in your PhD work. And yeah, just get the chance to ask some questions and hear what you're up to. Yeah, it's great to have you. Great to have you as part of the Primary Innovation team. I just want to remind everyone that our Primary Innovation webinars that John organises for us and makes happen in terms of the technology and everything and makes them flow are the first Thursday of each month at 12:10, so we can just grab a bite and sit and listen and ask a few questions over lunch. So next month's one is on the 2nd of July, and we've got Jeff Cooks giving us an overview of monitoring and evaluation and maybe a bit of a taster of the midterm evaluation for the program. And yeah, again, we send invitations around to those people involved in the Primary Innovation Program, but if you've got colleagues who would be interested in finding out more and would like to sit in, then they're more than welcome. This is for anyone who's got an interest in this area. So thanks again, John, for making it happen and doing all the practical bits and bobs.
No worries at all, Denise. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. It's been great to have people from the North Island, the South Island, or also the Big Island over here. So what a great way to get together to give some feedback for Sam and Aniek. So thanks everyone.